Hello everyone, how are you? Just for all of you, this is an adjustable mic, so please, if it's sitting right in front of your face, adjust it, because we are capturing this on live stream, and Facebook Live and also YouTube Live, so we do have those elements. I want to welcome all of you. I'm Ken Clark, I'm President and CEO of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, and welcome to the 100 Cities, 100 Memorials Press announcement. Today we will announce the first 50 World War I memorials to be designated as official United States World War I Centennial Memorials by the United States World War I Centennial Commission and the Commission's founding sponsor, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. At the end of World War I, nearly 100 years ago, American sailors and soldiers known as Yanks, Sammies, Doughboys returned home victorious from the battlefields of France and other places in Europe. After defeating Germany and the Central Powers, this victory came at great cost. Though America was only in the fight for 18 months, 6 months of combat, give or take, twice as many Americans were killed as compared to the entire 10 years of the Vietnam War. Once back home, the Doughboys began memorializing those who didn't come home, as well as their own service in town squares, courthouse lawns, and in cemeteries across the country. There are thousands and thousands of these memorials across the United States. Following in the footsteps of the Doughboys, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library and the World War I Centennial Commission, with the help of the American Legion and the VFW, seek to elevate 100 World War I memorials nationwide, one symbolic memorial for every year of the past century, by bestowing upon these memorials the official designation as a United States World War I Centennial Memorial, and by providing matching funds toward the renovation, restoration, and upkeep of these memorials. 100 Cities, 100 Memorials was born out of the desire to make sure that the World War I Centennial was observed from sea to shining sea. Remembering the service of those who fought, drawing attention to the important history of the war. The sailors and doughboys led the way in creating these memorials, and it is our job to follow their lead. Before I read the names of the first 50 selectees, I want to thank everybody who's been involved so far, because vision without actual organization and operations doesn't happen. So there are many, I'm not going to list a bunch of names, but there are many people from the Pritzker Military Museum and Library staff, the World War I Centennial Commission, the VFW, the American Legion, and a lot of people from various towns and cities across the country who put a lot of effort to get us to where we are today. So I want to thank everybody who's been involved at that level. It's just been an incredible journey so far, and we're only really halfway there with today's 50 announcement. So, without further ado, I'm going to read the first 50 for 100 Cities, 100 Memorials. Memorial Park, Mobile, Alabama. Veterans of World War I of the USA Monument in Phoenix, Arizona. World War I Commemorative Plaque, Berkeley, California. Carmel by the Sea World War I Memorial Arch, Carmel by the Sea, California. Chinese Americans Veteran Memorial, San Francisco, California. Memorial Tablet at Victory Memorial Grove, Los Angeles, California. Soldiers and Sailors Memorial, Wilmington, Delaware. Spiritualized Life Sculpture, Jacksonville, Florida. USS Tampa Memorial Window, Tampa, Florida. World War Memorial Natatorium in Honolulu, Hawaii. The John Burke Memorial Park Polk County Gold Star Monument in Des Moines, Iowa. World War I Monument, Pearson, Iowa. Doughboy Statue, Morton Grove, Illinois. Gold Star Memorial at Girthy Park, Riverside, Illinois. Victory Memorial, Chicago, Illinois. Village of Glen Carbon, World War II Seton Trenitz Doughboy Statue, Glen Carbon, Illinois. Wheaton, Illinois, World War I Obelisk, Wheaton, Illinois. Winnetka Cenotaph Memorial in Winnetka, Illinois. Victory Eagle World War I Memorial in Lawrence, Kansas. 9th Ward Victory Arch, New Orleans, Louisiana. Harvard World War I Monument, Harvard, Massachusetts. Memorial Grove at Green Hill Park, Worcester, Massachusetts. Fort George G. Meade World War I Memorial at Fort Meade, Maryland. Jacob Cousins Memorial Renovation Project in Portland, Maine. The Survivor World War I War Monument in Beaverton, Michigan. Soldiers Memorial Military Museum, St. Louis, Missouri. World War I Doughboy Memorial, Jackson, Missouri. Over the Top to Victory Doughboy statue in Missoula, Montana. The Gossman statue in Dillon, Montana. The Memorial Bell Tower in Raleigh, North Carolina. Burlington City Sons of the American Legion Rock of the Marne in Burlington, New Jersey. Cape May Soldiers and Sailors Monument, Cape May City, New Jersey. Rutherford World War I Memorial, Rutherford, New Jersey. World War I Memorial in Ridgewood, New Jersey. Baldwin World War I Memorial in Baldwin, New York. The Dover Patrol War Memorial in Brooklyn, New York. High Bridge War Memorial Doughboy Plaque Replication in Bronx, New York. Hudson World War I Memorial in Hudson, Ohio. The Spirit of the American Doughboy in Swanton, Ohio. Muskogee Doughboy in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Jenkintown Borough World War I Monument in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. Trafford World War I Monument in Trafford, Pennsylvania. World War I Monument in Danville, Pennsylvania. The Minatomi Memorial Park Tower in Newport, Rhode Island. The Sergeant Alvin York gravesite in Pall Mall, Tennessee. World War I Memorial Fountain in Jackson, Tennessee. Brown County, Texas, World War I Memorial in Brownwood, Texas. World War I Doughboy Monument, Ogden, Utah. The World War I Memorial in Raymond, Washington. And number 50, Spirit of the American Doughboy in Appleton, Wisconsin. I want to congratulate all of those who won and were selected. I now invite Terry Hamby, Chair of the United States World War I Centennial Commission, to the stage. Terry?
Thank you, Ken. Good morning. I'm honored to be a part of this great and noble cause of educating Americans about the Great War and the sacrifices of 4.7 million Americans who answered the call of their country. The Great War was the first time the world was engaged in conflict. It was a time when the world went mad. The inventions of weapons of destruction such as submarines, machine guns, gas, tanks, airplanes, and the extensive use of artillery outpaced the warfighting capabilities of the commanders, causing both sides to sustain unthinkable casualties. Europe lost almost an entire generation of young men. America entered the war in 1917, as President Wilson so eloquently stated, to bring peace and safety to all nations and make the world at last free. General Pershing arrived in France with the first doughboys in June of 1917, and the U.S. suffered our first casualties in November of 1917. The doughboys were there to bring peace, though most of them hadn't visited Europe or knew any of the people from whom they were defending liberty and freedom. But over 4 million doughboys were in uniform, and over 2 million strong, they came to Europe to defend the liberties of others. They were called the American Expeditionary Force and were made up of many ethnic groups living in the U.S. Native Americans represented the largest percentage of any ethnic group to serve, and were mostly all volunteers because at that time they weren't recognized as U.S. citizens and weren't included in the draft. African Americans and other ethnic groups were represented in the AF. The 369th Harlem Hellfighters, all African Americans of the 42nd Rainbow Division, fought valiantly side by side with the French. In World War I, the AEF suffered over 300,000 casualties, with 116,516 killed in action. Our war doughboys have been forgotten for 100 years. Congress established the World War I Centennial Commission to educate, honor, and commemorate the sacrifices of war veterans to all Americans. Because they no longer can speak for themselves, we must speak for them and build a national memorial in our nation's capital to forever memorialize our World War I veterans. On behalf of the World War I Centennial Commission, I'd like to thank Colonel Jennifer Pritzker and the Pritzker Military Museum and Library for being the founding sponsor of the World War I Centennial Commission. Many thanks to Ken Clark, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library CEO, and to Susan Meninga, the World War I Centennial Project Manager, whose tireless efforts on behalf of the World War I veterans needs to be commended. We're here today because of their steadfast dedication to properly honor our doughboys. The Military Museum and Library, with the support of the VFW and American Legion, sponsored a 100 Cities, 100 Memorials composition to provide grants to organizations or municipalities to assist with the World War I memorials located in communities throughout the United States. In communities across America, the 100 Cities, 100 Memorials program was established to honor the sacrifices of our World War I veterans and to start a conversation about the tragedies and many social issues of the Great War. Today, Ken Clark announced the first 50 cities selected for the grant and certification as a World War I Centennial Memorial. This is only the beginning of honoring these cities that have honored our doughboys with memorials in their hometowns. Now that we have announced the first 50 projects to be designated as official World War I Centennial Memorials, I would like to announce that we're officially reopening the submission period for applications. As we approach the deadline, we received many inquiries from towns and cities interested, but were unable to meet the deadline. A second round of submissions will be open from September the 27th, 2017 through January the 15th, 2018. Each of the applications were submitted during the initial first round, but not selected, will be automatically considered in the second round. 100 Cities, 100 Memorials plans to announce the remaining 50 World War I Centennial Memorials on 6 April 2018, the 101st entry of World War I of America into the war. And finally, together as Americans, we must build a national memorial in our capital to forever memorialize our doughboys. They're the only group of veterans involved in a world war not to be recognized. We must get this done. We're well into a fundraising campaign to build this memorial, but we desperately need your help. To learn more about how to submit an application for the 100 Cities or 100 Memorials or donate to the National Memorial, visit the World War I Centennial's website. Thank you. And I'd like to invite the Vice Chair, whose vision was this commission and the memorial, Edwin Fountain.
Thank you, Terry, and I want to echo your thanks to the Pritzker Military Museum and Library, and my thanks can be a little more meaningful, I think, because along with Libby O'Connell, I've been here since the beginning, unlike a Johnny-come-lately like yourself, but we've been here since the beginning of the partnership with PMML and have valued that partnership greatly, not only for helping the commission get up and running, but for taking the initiative on this 100 Cities, 100 Memorials project. And we've been pleased to partner with him on that particular project as well. And I think one important thing about the 100 Cities initiative, I happen to be from Washington, and there's one has to resist the temptation to focus all of one's activities on an effort like this in Washington or New York, and remember that most of the activity has to happen throughout the country. And so 100 Cities was a great opportunity to really focus our efforts throughout the country, where the commemoration really needs to take place. And as you look at the first 50 honorees of this project, it brings home in a very, very real way the fact that when World War I was over, just as after the Civil War, the commemoration was local. I'm from Virginia. We've got a great wealth of Civil War memorials in towns and cities and communities around the state. That's true throughout the eastern half of the country. After World War I, that tradition continued. Virtually all the commemoration of the war was done at the local level, in local communities. I don't want to overlook the Liberty Memorial in Kansas City, which those folks conceived of as a memorial to all the nation's veterans. But this country really didn't think in terms of national war memorials until the Vietnam veterans came home and advocated for a national memorial on the Mall in Washington to the veterans of that war. And that memorial was dedicated in 1982, followed thereafter by the Korean War Veterans Memorial, and then the World War II Memorial. So we've been working backwards. And now it's time for World War I. And we've got the challenge that the veterans of the other wars didn't face, that those advocates didn't face, and that we have no living veterans of World War I still with us today. Frank Buckles, the last American veteran of the war, died 6 years ago at the age of 110. And so it's been a different and more interesting challenge given that. But one thing that we say as we go out and around the country and advocate for this national memorial is that by honoring the veterans of a war 100 years ago who are no longer with us, we're telling the veterans serving today and who are still with us today that 100 years from now, they too will be remembered. We're going to have this is not the time for a full presentation on the National World War I Memorial that we're proposing, but as you may know, it'll be at Pershing Park in Washington, D.C., which anchors the western end of Pennsylvania Avenue, the great boulevard connecting the Capitol with the White House. As its name indicates, there's already a memorial existing there to General Pershing. It was established in 1981, and Congress has authorized us to redevelop that park as a complete World War I memorial. The designs are up and available on our website, ww1cc.org/memorial. We'll be having a ceremonial groundbreaking at the site on November 9th of this year, at which we will have the first full public viewing of the current renderings of the main memorial element planned for the site, which will be a 65-foot long monumental bronze bas-relief sculpture. Our sculptor, Saban Howard, until just a couple months ago, had been working very much in 2 dimensions as we've presented the design concepts to the various agencies in Washington that have to review and approve it. But a few months ago, he went down to Peter Jackson's film technology studios down in New Zealand and started taking those 2-dimensional images and turning them into 3 dimensions. And it has just made it much more real, much more exciting to those of us working on the project. And we'll be revealing that on November 9. But the main concept is to tell the story of an individual soldier and at the same time tell the story of the nation in World War I through a tableau of several different scenes of the war. And the sculpture starts with the soldier taking leave from his family, taking his helmet from his daughter, and then turning to join the parade to war, to join the march to war, the call to arms. And that parade then devolves into the scene of battle, as the parade then becomes a charge out of the trenches across the fields, with a central figure looking back to his men, calling them forward into the fray. And then after that central battle scene is the scene of the aftermath and the loss, showing the psychological and the physical toll of the battle. Our recurring figure emerges from that with some shell shock, some battle fatigue, what we call today PTSD. And then he rejoins the parade off stage, if you will, the parade home, and then rejoins his family, hands his helmet back to his daughter, symbolizing the passing of the legacy to the next generation, and on a broader level, having some foreshadowing for the war that would follow 20 years later. And that individual soldier story stands as a second meaning of the national story. The nation takes leave from its first 120 years or 140 years of history as a very inwardly focused Western Hemispheric nation, taking its first major leap onto the world stage, joining the call to arms, joining the international community in a way it hadn't before, being bloodied in battle, having its first experience in a major conflict like this beyond its own shores, the national cost of the war, the 116,000 who died, the 200,000 more who were wounded, and then marching again, joining the parade off stage, if you will, into the American century, and indicating all the ways that this country has been shaped and the world we live in today and that we operate in today has been shaped by the war. I was struck, many of you are probably watching the Vietnam War documentary on PBS right now, And I had known something of this episode, but I learned more about it. That in 1919, a young gentleman from Southeast Asia appeared at the American delegation to the Versailles peace talks to make a petition to Woodrow Wilson, advocating for national rights for his home country. The gentleman's name was Ho Chi Minh. And it just brings home to us that we truly do live in the long shadow of World War I today. But this memorial is meant to evoke a number of different thoughts and emotions. It's meant to evoke pride in American accomplishment in the war. It's meant to instill commemoration of the service and sacrifice of the 4.7 million American men and women who served. But my vision from day one, and I've been working on World War I memorial projects of one kind or another for about a decade, and in conceiving of a national World War I memorial, my first objective was always for the dumb high school kid who comes to Washington on his high school trip to go to the National World War I memorial and realize that, oh yeah, if there was a World War II, I guess there must have been a World War I. And so maybe that's what Memorial Hall, or Memorial Bridge, or Memorial Park, or whatever it is back in my hometown where I came from is all about. And so maybe when I get home, I'll pay a little attention to that memorial, and I'll go read the names. And I'll go look into my own family's, my own community's ties to the war. Because at the end of the day, all history is local, and all commemoration is local. And the 100 Cities, 100 Memorials project is a very fitting reflection of that fact. Ken?
Thank you, Terry and Edwin. And I like to think that memorial in Washington is directly connected to each of these memorials that we announced today, and the ones that we will announce in April, just like Edwin just got done saying. It's a driver into the community. So I also like to think that we're also kind of saving Washington's doughboy when we bring Pershing Square back to life as a National World War I memorial. I'd like now to introduce a key partner of 100 Cities, 100 Memorials. They were almost on board before the World War I Centennial Commission was on board, if that's even possible. But I have Martin Canester from the American Legion here, and they adopted 100 Cities, 100 Memorials as a central part of their centennial, which starts right around World War I. So Martin, if you'd come up and share a few words about your involvement. Thanks for being here. Thank you. Podium.
Okay. I do want to apologize for being slightly late this morning. I left home at 5:20, but typical Chicago traffic, some truck decided to run into another truck. But on behalf of the more than 2 million members of the American Legion, I'd like to thank the U.S. World War I Commemorative Commission and the Pritzker Military Library for sponsoring the 100 Cities, 100 Memorial Program. What a genuine way to recognize the hard work being done in communities nationwide to honor our World War I people. The American Legion came on board very early, and many of our posts and departments embraced that situation. We very much put it out as a program of the American Legion with some great local response. We're very pleased with that. Through our website, through our organization, they stepped up, and we are very proud of what our local grassroots support did to support the 100 Cities, 100 Memorials. Thank you.
I'd like to now introduce John Daven, the National Council of Administration member and Illinois representative for the VFW. Again, the VFW getting involved. There's a VFW post in every small town in America, and just like the American Legion, and to have the VFW involved with 100 cities, just like the American Legion, VFW posts got behind these applications across the country. And in many cases, gentlemen, you had your American Legion and your VFW posts partnering to make sure that they got an application into this program. So, John, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning. My name is John Daven, and I'm here today representing the Veterans of Foreign Wars. on behalf of nearly 1.7 million VFW and auxiliary members, it is my absolute honor to be participating in today's event. I bring you greetings from our Commander-in-Chief, Keith Harmon, and our Commissioner on the National World War II Centennial Commission, who is also our Quartermaster General, Deborah Anderson. The VFW dates back to 1899, and since that time has been a strong advocate for veterans. And it was our World War I veterans who truly shaped the VFW into one of the most respected veterans service organizations in the world. 4.7 million Americans served in uniform during World War I. More than 116,000 made the ultimate sacrifice. Another 204,000 were wounded. And while they were fighting halfway around the world, the VFW was here at a home fighting for them. Core to the VFW purchase is to perpetuate the memory and the history of our dead, to remember our fallen comrades. George Washington once said, "The willingness with which our young people are likely to serve in any war, no matter how justified, shall be directly proportional to how they perceive the veterans of early wars were treated and appreciated by their nation." We must remember them and their service. We must remember them nationally and locally. That is why this program is so important. The 100 Cities, 100 Memorial program gives local communities the incentive to find their memorials and do something to beautify them and bring the attention to the memorials, to the World War I, and to the veterans who served. The VFW has been publicizing and supporting this program for the past year, and we are excited to be here for the announcement of the first 50 winners. On behalf of the VFW, I congratulate the winners and thank you to the World War I Centennial Commission and the Pritzker Military Museum and Library for funding the wonderful program. Thank you very much.
We have some very special guests here today, and they are representatives from 3 of the memorials that were selected as winners. And I would like to invite Colonel Eugene Scott, who is the person who headed up the Victory Memorial activities and will be the one responsible for making sure that that monument is up and running by the time we celebrate our, we're going to do it at Armistice Day 2018. That's the plan. So, Colonel Scott, why don't you come up and talk about your memorial?
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it. I'm truly honored that the Victory Memorial Monument was chosen as one of the first 50 World War I memorials. The Victory Memorial has a very compelling story. We hear often about the 369th, that famous New York black unit, but the 370th was one of the best fighting units to go to France. Not black units, one of the best fighting units, because they were activated 1 year after returning from the Mexican War, where they chased Pancho Villa into the interior of Mexico. So with all the apparatus that goes with having combat experience, they were ready to go to Europe and fight a war. This story is so compelling to me because as a combat officer, I can just feel the difficulties and the tensions of war that these soldiers went through. So my wife Beverly and I, are sort of like a two-person team to make this happen. Along with the Friends of the 370th, this story will be told. The Victory Memorial stands as a testament to what those soldiers had to endure and the distinguished war record earned by the only black unit. Now let's get this straight. They were the only black unit to serve in combat commanded by all black officers. And those officers were from here in the Chicago area. Their commander, Colonel Frank L. Dennison, is the only black officer to have the honor of being a combat regimental commander in World War I. Those jobs don't come easy. Because of its fine and distinguished service, the 370th became one of the most decorated units of the Great War, and many soldiers were buried in the French soil. The wife and I are going to have an opportunity to go to Paris and to follow the trail of the 370th as they move north of Paris to the Belgian border and the famous defensive Hindenburg lines. It's moving to even think about that we're going to get that opportunity. Our project, Evergreens and Perennials, was conceived by my wife with the intention of extending the stories of these men would be told well into the future. In concert with a professor at the West Virginia University, we've got a Google expedition project that will involve young people and tell this story. I've often figured, how do I get young people to like history? Well, modern technology with Google is helping us out, because that is so exciting to put those goggles on and have this 360 historical experience about what happened right here in the city of Chicago. Thanks, Beverly, for your great assistance with this. And I think you told me that the Evergreens was for the lives lost, yet eternally remembered through the Victory Memorial. Okay. And the Perennials, which is the important part of this story, for the keepers of those stories who will learn and share them again and again well into the future. We must get past many of the difficulties that we have every day. When the 370th got ready to go to Fort Logan, Texas, they went down to Texas 2 months after the worst military riot in the history of the Army. And they came back to Chicago in 1919, 3 months before the Red Summer riots that plague our great country. Our story, we hope, will help us get past many of these difficulties. Again, thank you, Ken. Thank you, the World War I Commission. Appreciate the opportunity to serve. Thank you.
I need to point out that Colonel Scott and Beverly wouldn't be doing anything without the official blessing of the city of Chicago. And that was a key element in getting anything done with the 370th, and I think it's just the beginning of what's going to happen at that memorial down at 35th and King. Echoing that, we have Representative Jeannie Ives from Wheaton. Jeannie, will you come up and talk about how you had to work to get your memorial recognized? Thank you.
First of all, on behalf of the City of Wheaton, we want to thank the Pritzker Military Museum and Library for allowing us to be one of the 100 cities that will be commemorated in your World War I Centennial Memorials. I think it's important to understand that your commemoration of this actually continues the life on commemorating this memorial, which has been moved a couple times. And reading from the history of that memorial, I think it's important to understand also that as a previous speaker said, certainly the commemoration of World War I doughboys coming back were very localized. And reading from a document here, after the parades down Main Street and the static news stories for the returning soldiers, the community began to search for a way to immortalize their beloved warriors. In September of 1920, Colonel Robert McCormick was in charge of the dedication of the Roosevelt Highway between Wheaton and Chicago. The American Forestry Association urged him to speak at this dedication in order to start a nationwide movement to make the highway a Roosevelt Road of Remembrance by planting memorial trees along the route from Sagamore Hill to Chicago. Colonel McCormick, who owned the Chicago Daily Tribune, used his influence to start a popular national movement to dedicate roads of remembrance through the nation. You continue that commemoration with your World War I memorials. In Wheaton, on May 28, 1922, a memorial consisting of 2 bronze plaques with the names of all 500 Wheaton soldiers mounted on an obelisk flanked by a cannon was dedicated at the Warren L. Wheaton home, located at Roosevelt and Naperville Roads. 500 ash trees had been planted along Roosevelt Road leading up to the obelisk to create Wheaton's Road of Remembrance. That day, there was a service at Gary Memorial Church service during which Frank Herrick read one of his poems, Road of Remembrance, followed by a dedication at the monument site where the obelisk was unveiled by Comrade Strawn of the GAR, who placed a wreath on the monument, followed by a prayer of dedication. In 1931, however, Roosevelt Road was widened, creating the need to move the monument. The bronze plaques were put into storage and the cannon installed outside Colonel McCormick's mansion at Cantigny. A number of the trees had to be removed to various Wheaton parks. 5 years later, a new obelisk was built at Northside Park in Wheaton, and the bronze plaques were reinstalled. On November 22, 1936, a rededication ceremony was held at Northside Park. The ash trees that once lined Wheaton's Road of Remembrance have long since passed this community's memory, but the Northside obelisk, built in 1936, had become worn and damaged by age. But the citizens of Wheaton did not want this symbol of their past to disappear. So the Wheaton Park District decided to embark on a restoration project to save this monument. The World War I obelisk will remain standing at Northside Park entrance, a reminder of the men who enlisted, their community that supported them during the Great War, and that idealism, reform spirit, and determination that defines Wheaton. Its impact will be what it has always been, a reminder we must not forget the lessons of our history. Without remembering and honoring the past, we lose our future. So you have become one of many who have helped us remember our World War I veterans. 500 men answered the call in World War I out of approximate population of about 4,000. So you can understand the impact of World War I and what it had on our community. So we appreciate this. On a personal note today, I wear my grandfather's World War I dog tags. And I thank you as a veteran, as a West Pointer, as a mother of both an Army officer and a Navy officer. I thank you for your commitment to the history of the military and those who have served. Thank you.
Okay. If you haven't heard about Alvin York and his service in World War I, you might have been living under a rock. He is probably, I think it could be argued, he is the single most famous doughboy coming out of World War I, Medal of Honor recipient, very famous for his desire not to actually fight, and then ended up doing all sorts of stuff that should have got him killed many times over. And his single-handed actions allowing American forces and Allied forces to advance. So we have something very special in the fact that the Alvin York gravesite has been chosen as one of the first 50 of these 100 City, 100 Memorials. I think even more special is that we have Gerald York here, who is the grandson of Sergeant Alvin York. Gerald?
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. On behalf of the Sergeant York Patriotic Foundation and the York family, I would like to thank the Pritzker Military Museum and the World War I Commission for selecting my grandfather's grave for this honor. We are working hard to ensure the stories of World War I are passed down to the current generation. The soldiers, the heroes are preserved, and as has been mentioned by most of the folks here, education of the young folks. There's a Sergeant York. My grandmother actually sold my grandfather's farm. She lived 20 years past him. She actually sold the farm to the state of Tennessee, and it's now the Sergeant York Historical Park. And we get several thousand visitors a year. And what this will allow us to do is put some signage up around the grave, which is visited by a lot of school children and a lot of visitors, to talk about the Centennial, to talk about World War I. Most folks don't look at World War I. You talk about World War, everybody talks about World War II. And I think, as Terry mentioned earlier, when he goes out to speak, he asks for all the veterans of different wars, and he asks for World War I, and of course there are no veterans from World War I, and he says that's what the World War I Commission is here to do. And so we're very honored and pleased to have this donation, this grant that you have so generously bestowed on us, and we are committed to continuing the education, especially of the young folks. If you ever get to Pall Mall, Tennessee, we would love for you to visit the park, visit the center, visitor center, and my grandfather's grave, which is in the process of getting the signage and getting a path to it, so that everyone that comes through and visits will see the story of World War I and understand that there was a war before World War II, and the impact that had on the not only the nation but on the world, because of some of the divisions that happened after World War I. So again, thank you. We're honored to accept your support and appreciate the generosity. Thank you again for the Pritzker Military Museum and for the World War I Commission. And we're honored to be here and to be able to accept this. You have a beautiful facility, a beautiful city, traffic. I experienced that last night when I came in, a little bit more than in Pall Mall, Tennessee, but it's very nice. My daughter would have loved to have been here. My daughter is the executive director of the foundation, and she usually attends these. I was headed on another trip, and she said, "Dad, I need you to go because I can't go." And but she would have loved to have been here. She's been here in the past. She would have loved to have been here to accept this as well. But I'm glad and honored that I was able to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to ask everybody to give one round of applause for these distinguished individuals who chose to be here in Chicago. Your guys' stories, those are awesome. So, round of applause, please. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for spending the time to be here. There's a couple people that I need to mention by name. They're my partners in crime on 100 Cities, 100 Memorials. They're the ones having to put up with all my ideas. When this started as an idea and then moved into operation. So Susan Menenga is the World War I Centennial manager here. It's not exactly her title, but she's managing all things World War I related in our partnership, the World War I Centennial Commission. There's a guy named Teo Mayer, who is the back-end tech. He's out in California, but he's another one of our partners in making sure that this all works. Dan Dayton certainly needs to get a lot of credit. Libby and I talked about this project at the American Embassy in France a couple Aprils ago, and she was helpful in helping get this project going. Obviously, Edwin has been a key partner, and also Dan Dayton, in the executive director of the World War I Centennial Commission, who couldn't be here today. So there's a lot more people I could mention. An idea is just a vapor unless it has something behind it, and we have a great team. I also like to thank Megan Williams, who's also been one of those people having to listen to me talk and talk and talk about this project over the last couple years and make sure that it came to reality. So, thank you for joining us here today. The second round is officially open. You can visit ww1cc.org and find those applications. You can also go to pritzkermilitary.org/WW1. Both of those websites will have the full list of the 50 published today. And I want to thank everybody who traveled all this way. Just so you know, a lot of the people here in the room today are also attending the Midwest region, which is a heavily coordinated World War I Centennial Commission activity here in the Midwest that includes 11 states. And we'll be having our day-long meeting after this. So are there any questions for me or anybody who is up here right now that you would like to ask about anything having to do with 100 Cities, 100 Memorials? Don't be shy. You don't have to have them either. Any further comments from any of you on the stage? Going once? Going twice? Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it very much. Thank you so much for putting up with all that traffic. I'm so sorry.